Now, one of the things that you can do within cloud computing platforms like Azure is to create what are called virtual machines. Now, if you're not familiar with what a virtual machine is, it's basically a machine that you can control. It's called infrastructure as a service. You can use either SSH or RDP. Those are remote protocols in order to control machines remotely, to get into those machines and basically install software. And it's going to look and act very much like you had a computer running within your local environment. This is an example of a virtual machine. Very soon we're going to talk about how to create one. I'll get into the creation steps, but this is just the overview of what a virtual machine is. So I've just created this virtual machine. It's a Windows virtual machine running on a very small, very tiny type of virtual machine instance with one virtual CPU and only 2 gigabytes of memory, sort of an underpowered server, but it's good for demonstrations. And I just fired this up. Now, I used Windows Remote Desktop Protocol to remote into this. You see here that I have a public IP address that I can control this machine with, and I opened up the port for RDP, which is 3389. So I've actually intentionally opened up this port so that from my home computer I can connect to this virtual machine. So I'm going to put this to full size, and we can see here that this virtual machine looks and acts very much like it's just any other computer. This is a brand new, fresh install of Windows Server 2016. Okay, so now as I booted up this machine, the first thing it's asking me is, what do I want this machine to be? So this machine really has very little installed on it. You can see there's only a couple of things here under the Programs menu. If I wanted this machine to be a web server, I very easily can go through the wizard just like you would for running this machine on your local, and I can choose a web server role for this machine, and it's basically going to install all of the stuff that's required to make this virtual machine a web server. Now, I am going to have to open up the ports for port 80 or for port 443 in order to access this virtual machine from outside. So there is going to be a network problem because these machines have to be sort of closed off by default. But you see, it's very easily and very similar. If you have any experience working with servers in a development environment or within your local environment, the experience of installing a web server is very much similar to the way that you would do it within the cloud. Okay. Now, this machine is going to basically, it's going to run as long as it's running, right? So I'm going to minimize this. I am being charged, this machine is a standard B1MS virtual machine. Now we can see from the Azure's pricing calculator that a B1MS virtual machine with 1 CPU and 2 gigabytes of RAM, it runs about 3 cents per hour. And if you do this pay-as-you-go, which is basically paying by the second, it's going to run about $21 a month for a full month of this virtual machine. So it's very inexpensive. Now, there are other ways of pricing this if you're willing to commit to a full year and you're going to pay whether or not you use it. That price drops down to $14 a month. And if you commit to 3 years, same deal, whether you use it or not, it's $10 a month. And if you bring your own license, so let's say you don't pay Microsoft for the Windows license at the Azure level, but you have a corporate license that you can use, then you can pay as low as $7.50 a month roughly for a 3-year reserved with hybrid license. So the pricing can get very cheap. But even if you're just paying as you go, $20 a month for a virtual machine, billed by the second. So if you only need this virtual machine for 10 minutes, then really you're only going to pay a fraction of a penny in order for that level of virtual machine usage, okay? Now, keep in mind that a lot of other things are charged separately. So if you need extra hard disk space, let's say you need two 32 gig hard drives, it's $1.50 a month for a 32 gig hard drive. And so having two of them ends up an additional $3 on your cost. And if you're going to have a lot of storage transactions, so all of the egress from Azure to the outside world, you're paying 4/100ths of a cent for those, and you could end up paying more in storage transaction costs than for the actual VM at that low level. Okay, so VMs can be very cheap, and then they can also be very expensive. If you look at some of the high compute optimized instances, so let's go down to the E64 down here, $7.50 per hour. So even some of the most powerful computers with 64 CPUs and 400 gigabytes of RAM, it's running about $7.50 for an hour. So if you only need that for a day, that can be very affordable depending on your project. So virtual machines are computers that are very similar to the computers that are running in your local environment that you can remote into, that you can install any software that you like, and that makes you fully responsible for everything that is installed on there in terms of security and other updates. But it's basically infrastructure, computing power that you can rent by the second. And that's what a virtual machine is. So in this section, we're going to be talking about virtual machines.